Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Friday, March 21st. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And we have a very special guest today. We are joined once again by Matt Betts, the lead writer at Canadian Baseball Network and the host of the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to do this again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on. Anytime we have a chance to talk about baseball, I'm down. So,
Yeah, very exciting. Obviously, opening day just around the corner. You were down in Dunedin for the last little while, getting to take in some ball, some college ball, some Blue Jays, a little bit of everything. But before we get into it, I mean, how was your trip?
it was awesome. Weather was great. Hopefully, it starts to translate up north a little bit. But yeah, jammed a lot in the 5 days. Like you said, caught some, obviously, some of the big league spring training games. Was at the player development complex, saw a lot of the minor league guys. Kind of took a Canadian focus to a lot of the coverage, obviously, given my role. And caught a college baseball game too, which I always advocate that we should have better access to here. So that push continues, I guess we could say.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So I guess today what we're kind of hoping to do is we're going to do a little bit of a tee up for Canadian baseball for in 2025. But before we do that, I think that we do kind of got to get into some of the Jays storylines and some of the stuff you wrote about while you're down there. And I think this maybe is more recent, but kind of the more recent news coming out of Jays camp is, of course, Mark Shapiro's comments yesterday on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and saying that he's pretty confident that something's going to get done. I know you were coming back, but what is kind of your takeaway from hearing those comments from Shapiro and seeing that there is I think it was pretty notable that he came out and said that for a guy who's usually pretty guarded in what he says.
Well, that's the thing. First of all, I was disappointed that it happened on Thursday and I came back on Tuesday, but we'll leave that there. But
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I think if for a front office that's, perfected what I like to call front office speak, which is basically say a lot without saying anything. For him to come out and say he's confident that it will get done, not maybe or, it could. I think that says a lot for a guy like Mark Shapiro. He's always been a little bit more open than Ross Atkins, I find, when he does his media availabilities, but yeah, that was pretty telling. I think Blue Jays fans should be somewhat optimistic, cautiously optimistic, I would say, after those comments.
Yeah, I think too, we you joke or we joke, it was a deadline, but I guess not a deadline for Vlad. What have you kind of made of the entire situation where it's gone from him setting the deadline, them not being able to come to a deal, and then him saying he doesn't want to be a distraction, and then so much stuff has come out about it, and we've gotten the reports that he wants $500 million in present day value, and they offered him, I guess, 500 million with deferrals. What have you kind of made of the entire situation leading into Shapiro's comments yesterday?
I think a deadline when money's involved is never actually a hard deadline. I think if the Jays came with him for 700 million tomorrow, I think he signs the deal. So I don't buy too much into deadlines. Um, Vladdy not wanting to be a distraction has certainly been a distraction, I think, for this team. I don't think that really translates onto the field per se. But I heard someone say the other day that, wait till Chris Bassett has a bad start middle of July and someone brings it up to see what happens then and if it's talked about or in the middle of a losing streak saying it comes up.
Yeah.
But I've also heard that some people think that it looks a little desperate on Vladdy's end that he talks so much about it. Given that, I mean, people are going to ask him about it. And he's going to answer the question, so I don't know how much I believe in that either. But I don't know if this gets done before opening day. I doubt it does. I think the Jays are comfortable going into next offseason and letting the market play out. I was surprised a little bit by Vladdy saying he feels his floor is 500 million, even in a bad season. I think the market said otherwise. I mean, you look at guys like Alex Bregman or Pete Alonso. If he has a down year by his standards, even like 22, 23, I don't see someone forking over $500 million for a first baseman in this market. Obviously, the offseason will tell that after the season, but I mean, we'll see. But I found those comments kind of interesting. I think that sweet spot is that 500 million. And if they can get somewhere near that, I think a deal can get done.
Well, it's so unique as well because the floor of Vladdy is, I mean, we've seen quite low, and the ceiling is in that Juan Soto discussion, right? But if you were a betting man, like where do you think the Jays kind of have this pegged, and just how do you kind of see it playing out for the Jays?
I just don't see. He's not Juan Soto, and he's not Shohei Ohtani. I mean, you look at Juan Soto's numbers, you look at his OPS, it's in the 900s almost every year. Vladdy's had a couple of down seasons. If he hits 26, 27 home runs and drives in 100 and hits 260, that's not a $500 million player with a 800 OPS. Where do I see that? I think the Jays, like I said, are completely comfortable going into the offseason next year and saying, come back to me with your best offer that you can get on the market or just negotiating at that time. I think it still lands probably around the 450, $500 million mark, maybe a little bit above if he has an MVP caliber season. But that's a lot of money. I mean, think about before two off seasons ago. 700 million was unheard of before Otani and then Soto. So, it's funny how that now becomes kind of the starting point for a guy is 500 million. I mean, I remember Mike Trout signed for what was it, 436 or 426.
Yeah.
That was eye-popping that he got into the fours, and now it seems like 500's the bare bones that he's going to accept.
Yeah, it's funny. I've said this a bunch, but I would just love to be a fly in the wall in the Blue Jays front office as they have these Vladdy discussions because that they're sitting there like I don't they're sitting there and they have their valuation. I bet you that their valuation probably doesn't even touch 500. Even wonder if it starts with a four realistically based on what they have because realistically it is a first baseman who has had kind of the inconsistency. So I think it's a really interesting discussion, but I do think that there is like so much to it where having him locked in is valuable for the franchise going forward. With basically their competitive window being tied to him. I wonder, like, I mean, what do you kind of think if they do kind of go into the offseason? Like, I mean, how important is it that they do get him done, or do you think that there are avenues for them to kind of find their way or find a way to avoid a rebuild, even if they don't have him locked up long term?
I think everything hinders on Vladdy, to be honest. I mean, the farm system's 27th ranked. There's some pieces there. I think it's a little bit better than some people might be giving it credit for. But if Vladdy walks, who knows what happens with Bo? If both of them are gone, I mean, there's your cornerstone pieces over the last 6 years. I think it can get real ugly and fall off a cliff real quickly for this franchise if one or both are not locked up long term. They've shown that they want to spend money. I mean, there's some money coming off the books, after this season. I think Bassett's done. Springer, I believe, has one more year. They could do some, they could get creative a little bit, but you're probably going to be chasing a guy like Vladdy and Bo in the offseason. So it seems like you're kind of chasing your tail if you let them walk. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But saying that for Vladdy, I mean, if you look at, I heard the number 565, 200 million less than Juan Soto. I only really see that number going down over the course of the season. Like, how does he improve his value where that number goes substantially up? I mean, I think that's kind of what the Jays might be banking on. That he still has a really good season, helps him to the playoffs, but is he 565, 600 million? They're hoping not, and probably not. If I'm a betting man, I'd probably say that number goes down, if anything.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. We'll kind of see. I mean, I think ideally they probably get the extension done before opening day, but I guess we'll kind of see. And it's at this point, it's almost like kind of beating a dead horse, kind of the Vladdy conversation. Just I think the more that comes out about it, the more that you're kind of like, all right, let's get this done.
I mean, like I know Keegan Masson said this a lot, but every city he goes to, this is going to be the question:
Yeah.
Boston, New York, Chicago, Texas. Like it's not going to end, and it's going to get more heated if they start to lose, and it gets towards the deadline. What do they do? You saw the Angels; they held on to Otani and tried to kind of make a late push, and that blew up in their face as he walked after the season. So it's going to be interesting to follow all season long. I think best case scenario is the Jays are good. They added the deadline. They go in the off season and they re-sign them. I think that's kind of the ideal situation, or get it done before the season. Whether they do in the next 6 days, I don't know, but I guess we'll see.
All right, well let's keep moving on to some of the stuff you covered while you were there because obviously, like you mentioned a lot of baseball for you down in Dunedin and I think maybe the most interesting storyline that you gave some great coverage on was kind of around the spring breakout game where Arjun Nimala, Trey Savage and the bunch of Jays young prospects all performed pretty well in a win over the Twins. Let's start with you, Savage, because I think that was probably the most impressive thing to me. I think obviously Jake Bloss was really good, but Savage looked amazing kind of in his second inning after shaking off the nerves of the first inning. I think he was really awesome. What was kind of your takeaway from Savage and his outing?
Yeah, he had those nerves early on, but I thought that was expected. It was his first pro appearance. He didn't pitch at all last year after getting drafted out of ECU. So those nerves are kind of to be expected. How quickly he moves to the system is definitely going to be something to watch. Can he be a guy that, impacts by the end of the year, early in 2026? I think that's going to be interesting. I think he has the stuff to. But the jump from college baseball to professional baseball is such a steep one that I think he's going to need a little bit of time to kind of just adjust to the schedule, kind of the routine. Um, but yeah, who knows if they need an arm late in the bullpen late in the year? I mean, and he performs at AAA or Double A or wherever he ends up to start the year. He could help this team later on in the year. It wouldn't surprise me. I would say that.
The sense I guess is maybe he starts higher in the minors and he's able to progress quickly, right? And I guess you're kind of hoping if you're the Jays that he's maybe high minors end of the year, maybe knocking on the door to the big leagues. But Savage obviously not the only guy that was impressive during the spring breakout game. I mean, Zach mentioned Jake Bloss. I thought that he was really good. I mean, he's flashed that high heat kind of this year, which wasn't really part of his arsenal last year. But who else during the spring breakout game really caught your eye?
I mean, Arjun Namala, obviously, the Jays' number one prospect. I think the big thing with Namala has been his comfort level. He seems a lot more comfortable, not only on the field, off the field, the way he kind of carries himself. You got to remember, this is a 19-year-old kid. I actually got a chance to speak with John Schneider about him for a story that I did, and kind of hinted at the comparison with Vladdy and Bo, given he managed those two in the minor leagues. And he said, personality wise, there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, skill set is a little bit different, but just to be mentioned in the same breath as those two, obviously is really impressive. I got to speak with Desan Brown, the only Canadian in the game, between the Twins and the Jays, and he got his Rawlings minor league Gold Glove earlier in the week. So for a team that values run prevention, obviously they're loving that out of the Canadian. He's going to be a matter of whether he can hit or not at the big league level, whether he can produce enough. He can run. He has the defense. He's probably still a little bit further away. Jake Bloss, like you mentioned, he'll probably play a factor this year, I'm guessing, in the Jays rotation at some point, given the kind of volatility that rotations can have health wise. But those were Alan Roden. Obviously, he's been a big talk of camp. He played really well. He's been really impressive on the big league side. So, like I said, I think the now getting a little bit closer look and kind of diving into a little bit more. I think the minor league system is a little bit better than people might be giving it credit for. It's not a top system by any means, but there's some pieces there that can definitely help them in the near future.
You've just kind of alluded to it now that the system's a little bit deeper than maybe people perceived going into the year. Is there anybody in particular that you've got an eye on? I mean, Roden's the obvious choice, but even beyond him, are there any other guys that are maybe a little bit further down the prospect lists that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think it's disappointing. I'll stick with the Canadian theme. I think it was disappointing not to see Adam Mako in that spring breakout game. He was talked about a little bit as far as starting pitching depth prior to that knee injury. So I think once he gets back, I don't know how long. Didn't get a chance to catch up with him, but I don't know how long that would be. But and again, a lefty starter. If you look at the Blue Jays rotation, there's no lefties unless they're going to slide Yarbrough into the rotation at some point if there's a Scherzer injury. But yeah, Barrios, Bassett, Gosman, Scherzer, and Francis, they're all right-handed. So I think Mako is going to be interesting to follow him going forward once he gets back to health,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, another guy that you got to see while you were there, that hopefully does get to play a role on this Blue Jays team in 2025 is Alek Manoah and his first bullpen back after undergoing Tommy John. What did you see from him? And I think getting to speak to him, what was it kind of like, or what were his spirits like as he's kind of working back here?
He looked good. I mean,
Yeah.
it had some pop on it, had some late life on, which you don't usually necessarily see in a first bullpen back from Don John. I thought he almost looked a little bit too amped up, and they might try to pull him back a little bit, knowing
Yeah.
also his personality. But yeah, I thought he looked really good. And as far as afterwards when he was talking, you could just see the joy in his face. I mean, he's back on the mound, kind of like the kids' game coming back, right? They get back out there, and it was kind of a fun day for him. So hopefully that keeps progressing. He talked a lot about the support system of his fellow pitchers. Gosman, Bassett, Chad Green, Eric Swanson were all there watching. And you can really see the support there for him. And he's eyeing a second half comeback potentially, which would be June would be the 12-month mark. So maybe July or August. Yeah, he's going to make things interesting in this Blue Jays rotation. He was better last year than he was in 2023 before the injury. So it's definitely something, maybe a second half storyline that could shape the Jays season.
Yeah, will be interesting to see how he progresses. I mean, obviously, I don't know if we're ever getting like the Cy Young candidate back from him, but if he can kind of come back and be a part of the rotation, I think that would be a great story. And obviously, you're rooting for the best because he seems like a good dude who does care deeply about it. So,
Well, the other
uh,
thing is it's an older rotation,
yeah,
right? You look at Scherzer's 41, I believe. Berrios, Bassett, Gosman are all over 30. So to have a
It's
little bit of
he
a younger guy penciled in,
exactly.
it's going to be important. I mean, these guys, you saw velocity for Gosman go down a little bit in his last start. I try not to read too much into spring training performances, but that's what happens when you get older. Scherzer with his thumb issue, like this is what happens when you get older in baseball and any sport, really. So having a little bit of a youthful Manoah in there might be really beneficial.
I
yeah.
was just gonna say it would be huge, just given like you said that it's all these kind of older guys. It basically would be him and Bowden Francis, kind of the young guns, right?
Yeah, I mean, like if for sure, and your Savage coming up obviously is going to be a factor in the years to come. But yeah, they're trying to win now. We're not talking about 26, 27, 28. They're trying to make the playoffs today. So this season. So yeah, for sure. You can never have too much pitching. Let's just put it that way. You hear that all the time.
How concerned are you about the Scherzer something? I know we got the report this morning that he's going to start for the Jays in spring training tomorrow against the Twins. But I believe the thumb thing is interesting because it sounds like it is similar to the nerve issue that he dealt with last year that is impacting his thumb.
Yeah, so I was surprised. I'm surprised by this, to be honest, because when he met with the media, I believe it was on Monday or Tuesday after he threw in the minor league game. There was an undertone of frustration for sure with this injury. I mean, he mentioned the 50 pitch mark and most of the issues pop up the next day with how it feels and the pain. But there was definitely some frustration. I didn't walk away from that media availability being overly optimistic for him. So to hear that he's pitching in a big league game tomorrow, I believe, against the Twins, and then maybe making his start. I think he's lined up for that Washington series, game one or two. Yeah, and then you hear John Schneider say that this is something they're going to have to manage all season. So I'm wondering if it's just a matter of he's got to manage it. This is, some time off might not fix this issue. He's had it in the past. So being 41 years old, there's a certain level of just figuring it out on the fly, so to speak. So I'm wondering if that's kind of been the realization for them in the organization that this just needs to be something that you deal with as opposed to starting on the IL and figuring it out and having it go away.
I'm interested by like the idea of like I mean dealing with like a thumb and nerve issue. Like, is that something that it's smart to pitch through?
Well, that's what he was worried about. His worry wasn't even so much about the thumb itself. It
Yeah.
was how that impacts his shoulder. He had that teres major injury that he suffered in Toronto, actually, well, with Texas 2 years ago. He had a scap issue last year. So how it kind of works its way up the arm was more kind of seemed like his concern,
Okay.
which is obviously a concern. I mean, if he
Yeah.
has a thumb injury and then, it translates into a shoulder injury, that turns into more long term. But again, this is just kind of the risk you run with being 41 years old trying to pitch in the big leagues. I think they're starting to come to that realization maybe that this is just something we're going to have to deal with. And if he needs to go on the IL, he needs to go on the IL. You heard before they signed him or when they signed him, if they can get 20, 25 starts out of him, that's probably they're probably happy with that. Which I joked the other day that's almost $1 million a start. So I don't know if that's economically very beneficial. But yeah, I mean, if they get 20, 25 starts out of him and they make the playoffs and he's there for the playoffs, I think that's a contract that was worth the money.
I guess the hope then would be that every start's about $1 million worth of a start.
Yeah, you
But
hope he goes
for
about 15 or 20 and
exactly.
0.
But no, I guess with Scherzer, right? I mean, obviously the injury kind of puts a damper on the situation, but it still feels like a worthwhile bet regardless, even though this injury concern has immediately flared up because you kind of knew this going in, right? This is almost baked into the cost of acquiring him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's you knew, right? Anytime you sign a 41-year-old, to a much lesser extent, you look at Joey Votto last year. I mean, you knew like he might be here, he might not. He might hit 15 home runs if given an extended run. He might not. It obviously didn't work out in that case. Obviously, much more risk on this side with the 15 million. But yeah, it's just kind of what comes with the territory with signing a guy like this. But I will say. what you see on TV with Max Scherzer is what he's like. He's very matter of fact. He's very serious. He's very intense. So when he's on the mound, I'm not worried about his compete level whatsoever. I think it's a great signing from that perspective. It's just making sure he's on the mound consistently.
Were you able to see like kind of any of the impact that he was having on like his fellow rotation mates? I'm curious to you know, I think what he gives on the field is going to be great, but I'm intrigued by what he can kind of provide as far as like mentorship to the Bowden Francises, to the Jake Blosses, to the Alec Manoas. Were you able to kind of see any of that?
I didn't see him around very much, to be
Okay.
honest. I was at the player development complex. Jose Barrios talked a little bit about it after being named the opening day starter, about how nice it is to have those other veterans in the rotation and learn from each other, bounce ideas off each other. Chris Bassett's talked a lot about how his friendship with Scherzer. So I think it is having impact. I didn't personally see really any of it. But yeah, Barrios seemed pretty happy that he has, three other veterans following him. And Bowden France is coming off a great year, obviously, following him, after opening day.
Yeah, I know you wrote about Jose Barrios being named the opening day starter as well. Third one for him. I think he moves into some pretty rarefied air in Blue Jays history. I believe he joins like a group of four of pitchers to make three or more opening day starts. What was it kind of like getting to talk to him about that? I know he seemed pretty emotional and like pretty honored to get that nod once again. What was it kind of like asking him those questions?
Yeah, so Schneider actually mentioned that they were going to name the opening day starter the day before. And Barrios, we got him in a bit of we got him in a scrum and kind of tried to get it out of him if he knew. He said he didn't know. But the next day, obviously got named. Super happy about it. Obviously, super honored. It's a big start. Obviously, opening day. It's a little bit different. I asked him if the preparation's any different to get ready for an opening day start as opposed to maybe a start in July. I think he's just trying to keep it the same. He's done it five times now in his career. He did a couple times with the Twins. So, but just a super grateful, really nice guy. And yeah, just seems super grateful for the opportunity. It always made sense that it would be him. I mean, I think Gosman might have had his chance to. Scherzer, though, with this thumb issue, was never really realistic. Bassett coming off a down season by his standards wasn't realistic, and obviously Francis wasn't going to get the nod. So it always made sense that it would be Barrios.
Well, do you make anything of it not being Kevin Gosman? Because Zach and I had this conversation elsewhere that it's interesting that it isn't Gosman because it kind of feels like he is their ace still, even though he's coming off a down year.
Yeah, just because Barrios has done it before now three times, and I think you could have. John Schneider mentioned that you could throw a name in a hat and pick it out to a certain extent. I always thought it would be Barrios or Gosman, but the feeling all along was that it was Barrios, just given the history with the franchise and having done it, two other times. But yeah, I think you couldn't have gotten wrong if you named Gosman the opening day starter.
This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
All right, well, I guess we can kind of move on, kind of covering, I think we covered every Blue Jays storyline that's kind of come out recently, and kind of get into what's going to be an exciting year for Canadian baseball. So many guys on the move this year, so many guys landing with new teams, a bunch of guys kind of knocking on the door. Kind of a new era of Canadian baseball emerging, I think. Obviously Joey Votto and James Paxton retiring in 2024 opens the door for some guys to kind of emerge as the face of Canadian baseball and kind of take that next step, especially with the World Baseball Classic, less than 12 months away at this point. Are there any kind of Canadians that you're most excited to watch this season at the big league level?
Yeah, I think I always love debuts, so I'm gonna go with Liam Hicks. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at the Marlins roster, you can kind of do some process of elimination. He's one of two catchers on their 26-man roster as of right now, if you look on their website. So he's a Rule 5 pick. So obviously the rules around that, as far as if they don't carry him, it's looking like he's going to make the opening day roster. I'm kind of poking around to try and see if anyone's heard anything definite. But yeah, if he makes his debut, the Marlins are going to be a team to watch with Quantrill and Otto Lopez. Otto Lopez has kind of turned his career around a little bit. He's performed pretty well in Miami. So there's not a ton of reason, I don't think, to watch Marlins games unless you're a Canadian baseball fan. You want to watch
Yeah.
Quantrill, Hicks, and Lopez. So I think that's probably the biggest one. Obviously, I love watching Cade Smith pitch. We had him on our podcast, and he's such a smart guy. It's fun to watch him pitch. Eric Sabrowski had a bit of an injury, so obviously him in that Guardians bullpen that was elite last year to see if they can kind of, return to that form. Those are probably the two big ones for me. Nick Pivetta, obviously, in San Diego is a big one. I'm a big fan of Mike Soroka. I think the stuff is electric when he's on. So to see if he can kind of rekindle his form with Washington, obviously Canadians would love to see that.
Zach mentioned it there just a moment ago, but a changing of the guard in terms of the Canadian baseball landscape. If you had to pick someone to be the face of Canadian baseball at this stage, who's your guy at this point? Because there's no Votto now, and he was such an obvious face for so long that it's a bit of a vacuum right now.
Oh, that's a really good question. You put me on the spot here. Yeah, it's definitely a younger crop of Canadians in the big leagues. I don't know if I would say necessarily the one face, but you got to look at the nailers, I think. Obviously, Josh and Bo, Miles had a hit in a minor league game. They just hit. It was a check swing too. I don't know if you
Yeah.
Yeah,
check it
yeah,
out.
Yeah. With Bo catching too. It was pretty
exactly.
Yeah.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the nailers, it's hard when you have three brothers. I mean, I think that's kind of where this is going. It would be awesome to see them all in the next World Baseball Classic
Yeah.
roster. I think Miles might be a little bit further away than that. But yeah, I would say the nailers, obviously, for obvious reasons.
I will kind of want to get into Josh a little bit too because I think he's a really interesting story this season now that he's in Arizona, kind of filling in a big role there with a team that's expected to kind of be a contender. Obviously, it's a really good division, and moving from the AL Central to the NL West is no easy task. But what are you kind of expecting from him this year as he kind of slots into the middle of that order?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot on his shoulders. I mean, they lost
Yeah.
Christian Walker obviously to Houston, and he's kind of been brought in to replace some of that production. But he's such an intense guy. He's going to infuse a lot of intensity into that lineup, which is needed. It's going to be fun to watch him face that Dodgers team, 12 times a year. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him. But he's used to it in Cleveland. I mean, that was a competitive team last year making it to the playoffs, so he's played in those big moments. But yeah, it's going to be exciting to watch him in a new setting. And now him and Bo are no longer on the same team. So I don't know. They play at some point this year. I don't know if it's in Cleveland or Arizona, but that'll be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, for sure. I think that'll be fun. I know, like, kind of trying to like search through the media stuff to see like how much they've been like saying about each other, and it hasn't really seemed like too much. But it'll be Bo's first MLB experience without his brother. So
I'm
interesting.
curious what that home plate interaction will be like for
Yeah,
Bo.
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be great. I think Bo's kind of interesting as well this year because like it seems like this is the year where he's gonna, maybe kind of have to take the leap to being, kind of what he was expected as like a top 100 prospect type as like maybe, emerging as a two-way catcher that can do it on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely did it. He handled that pitching staff really well. It was one of the
Yeah.
best, especially the bullpens was arguably, if not the best in the league last year. It's going to come down to his bat. I mean, can he hit 220? Can he hit 20 home runs? Can he drive in 60? If he can do that, it's more than enough. But defensively, he's obviously comfortable with that staff now, and you're right. He came up, he was a first round pick and he had a lot of expectations on him and he got to the big leagues relatively quickly, but now it's kind of I don't want to call him a veteran because he's, only a few years into his big league career, but as a catcher, you kind of have to take on that leadership role. It's kind of thrust upon you whether you like it or not. So definitely watching him kind of evolve. And as guys get comfortable over the years, they usually settle in if they have the skill set, which I think he does. So definitely something worth keeping an eye on. And again, if you want to watch the Marlins, you should also watch Cleveland if you're a Canadian baseball fan with their Canadians. So yeah, Cleveland and Miami, I guess, if you're looking for someone to root on a Blue Jays off day.
What I'm hearing is a 1997 World Series rematch here would be a best situation for Canadian baseball
Yeah, good
fans.
connection. Yeah, the Jays aren't in there. Yeah, Cleveland, Miami. Yeah, a rematch of 97. I don't know how that would draw in the national ratings.
I
Yeah,
don't know
that's
how that looks in terms of probabilities either.
no, yeah, I wouldn't put too much money on Vegas in that for sure. But yeah, that would be interesting for north of the border. I think the ratings would be okay.
One guy that I'm kind of interested about as well, and I think could maybe like slot into the face of Canadian baseball conversation is Tyler O'Neill as well as he joins the Orioles here. What do you kind of think? I mean, he has kind of had like that up and down career. Last year led the Red Sox in home runs, but still kind of had the injury issues. Signs the big deal with Baltimore. What do you kind of expect from him this year?
I don't know if anyone's happier that they're moving the wall in.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I know.
I mean, he took full advantage of Fenway. I thought that was a great place for him to hit, and obviously it showed to be true. But yeah, Baltimore's interesting to me. I think I don't love their rotation. Obviously, they got a lot of young bats in the lineup they can hit. Felix Bautista's back in the back end of the bullpen. I like their bullpen. But yeah, he's gonna need to produce a little bit. Anyone out of the corner outfield spots needs to produce with power, essentially. And obviously he can do that. But he's coming off a big year. He had a couple down years there in St. Louis, and the expectations certainly a lot higher now. Coming off that year in Boston.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. I think him kind of replacing Anthony Santander. It's a bet that they're making there, kind of on the financial side.
Yeah, for
Um, a couple more guys. I mean, like kind of on the younger side, who I think are kind of in for important years as well, kind of like Tyler Black, as hopefully can kind of crack their opening day roster and earn a spot there. Edouard Julien kind of in the same boat where he had like such a good rookie year and then down last year, and Matt Brash as well, kind of coming back from this year and kind of also in the same boat where trying to crack that opening day roster despite still kind of working back. Who of those three are you like most confident that is going to be an impact player at the major league level this season?
I think, assuming he comes back off the injury, fine. I think Brash. I think he's going to be in the back end of that Mariners bullpen that's completely built on pitching. I mean, they did not much on the offensive side. If they want to compete in that AL West, they're going to have to pitch, which I think they will. I mean, that rotation is probably the best in baseball. He was really good for them, 2 years ago. So I think Brash is probably the one to make the most impact. But yeah, you're right. I think with Julian, he needs to have a bounce back. I think it's easy to get lost in the shuffle when you have a really good year and then maybe a down year or two. So it's gonna be a big year for him wherever he plays, even if he's at AAA. Playing well there and showing that he can fit into that Twins lineup is going to be important for him. And Tyler Black for sure. I think he's starting to strike me as a bit of like a super utility guy. And he's played a little bit of outfield. He can play. He's played first base now for them. He can play the corner infield spots. He can play second base. He played second base in college at Wright State. So I think he's got a lot of flexibility that can help him land in that Brewers lineup. It's just a matter of where they want to use him and how they want to use him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think Eddie Julian, obviously a favorite of this podcast, but not to put too much into spring numbers, but he's only striking out 18% of the time so far this spring, which would be a big development for him.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think in today's game, yeah, you cut down those strikeouts, put the ball in
yeah,
play. It's kind of shifting that way a little bit. So
yeah, yeah.
That's
Will be
also
interesting to see.
to a certain degree, like obviously he has those huge strikeout numbers, but he's still got some pretty strong bat to ball, just generally skills. So if he does cut down the strikes, excuse me, if he does cut down the strikeouts, that's kind of, for him, like that turns him into almost a different player, right?
yeah, and I think we saw that right when he came up the first time. I think he kind of saw what he's capable of. He's got pop. He's hit. He's had power all the way back to college when he was at Auburn. So I think he's still a very useful piece. You look at a guy like Royce Lewis now pulls his hamstring, so they're down a bat there. If he can step up, not that he's going to play third, but if he can step up and fill some of that void in that lineup, maybe that's an avenue that they look at going.
You mentioned Liam Hicks earlier as a guy who seems set to debut. But I'm kind of who are you watching in the minor leagues as who kind of seems to be the next Canadians that are going to be, on the cusp of making their major league debut and who might be kind of the next ones to join the fraternity of Canuck big leaguers.
I thought Owen Casey might have maybe not out of on opening day. Obviously, the Cubs went to Japan, but he got hurt there. I think it was a back issue. So I'm definitely watching how he responds to that. I think he's close. You heard some rumblings about him in trades in the offseason, Jesus Luzardo. Um, he's probably the next one in line to make his big league debut, assuming he can get back healthy and produce like he has. We had Jim Callis on our podcast 2 off seasons ago. He said Casey is looked at as a 35 to 40 home run potential guy. I mean, that's a big expectation. Obviously, that's a crowded Cubs outfield to a certain extent with Crow Armstrong and Suzuki and Happ and guys that can play there at the big league level already. But I think he gets a crack this year if he can get healthy soon and kind of have a good start to his minor league season.
Yeah, he's an exciting prospect for sure. I think the 35 to home runs would be really cool if he could kind of break
Yeah, he
through
said
and
that, and I
become
was
that.
like, "That's that." He said that, I was like, "That's no joke." Like, you're not saying
Yeah.
he's gonna hit 15 in the big leagues and hit 250, like 35, 40 home runs. That's big time power. So, again, depending on how they want to utilize those outfield guys, who knows, is he a piece you dangle at the deadline? That would be certainly, enticing for anyone at the deadline if they're looking to add and make the playoffs. But I could also see him impacting the team on the field too. So
Th-
Yeah.
this isn't something we necessarily discussed, but just to dangle the thought, let's say that things go sideways for the Blue Jays. Let's say that a Vlad or a Bo becomes a trade piece. Owen Casey, future Blue Jay, do we dare dream about something like that being a possibility?
I mean, I think it would look better alongside Vlad and Bo.
Yeah.
But yeah, why not? I mean, that would be fun, right? From Oakville right down the road. Yeah, why not? It could happen.
Would be exciting. I know it's funny because the Jays don't I they have Zach Pop who's hurt, but they don't really kind of have like the Canadian guy that's going to be locked into the lineup like they have with Jordan Romano, and it's too bad really. I don't know if there was like really a move for them to make. I guess O'Neill might have kind of been in that role. Obviously they end up with Santander instead. Um, but yeah, it's too bad that they don't kind of have the Canadian guy.
Yeah, speaking of Romano, that's going to be weird seeing him in a
Yeah.
Phillies. I haven't really seen him pitch at all this in this spring training, but yeah, seeing him in a Phillies jersey, that might look a little bit weird for a lot of people, I think.
I know he hurt Arelvis. He was the guy who threw the pitch that took Arelvis out of the game.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure Rollins would appreciate
Yeah,
that.
some
Yeah.
long-standing beef there, I'm sure, those
Yeah,
two.
let's stir up that rumor.
I think too with the World Baseball Classic being next year, who are you watching as far as like somebody that might not be on the team that could earn a spot on the team or is looking to put their name in the discussion to be able to crack that team next year?
Yeah, like I said, this might be a bit of a long shot, but Miles Naylor would be cool,
Yeah,
right? Like playing along Bo and Josh, and you know, maybe getting Jordan Romano to play for Canada as opposed to playing for Italy. I don't know how that would all work out, but that would be one heck of a bullpen. I mean, you look at, Eric Sabrowski, Cade Smith, Matt Brash, Jordan Romano. I mean, that's more than capable. That makes it a 5, 6 inning game a lot of the time. So
yeah,
I think that's kind of one of the storylines I'd be watching. Obviously, watching guys take the next step as well. Owen Casey, Edward Julian, kind of like we mentioned earlier, the kind of changing of the guard in Canadian baseball. I think we've seen that over the last couple of years, but I think this next World Baseball Classic is certainly going to be kind of put that on display. They're also in a different pool this year, which I found was
yeah,
interesting. I don't have the exact pool in front of me, but they're not in Arizona this year with the States. So
yeah. They're
maybe a
in
little
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, yeah. So maybe a little bit. I don't want to say an easier path because that's never the case, but maybe you get to avoid the States for once. So
Yeah.
that you know.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. I think as that team unfolds, I think like you mentioned, the bullpen is hopefully going to be a strength if they get all those guys there, and then I think kind of veteran rotation-ish with like Quantrill, Soroka, Pivetta, hopefully like that kind of group. I think that the pitching could be really good, and then kind of the young crop of hitters as well will be interesting to watch.
And Freddie Freeman, of course, if we
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I'm sure he'll want to come back and play, which would be nice. Who knows? Maybe Votto comes out of retirement. You've seen that.
yeah,
Who was it? Doug Matheson or a couple guys, John
yeah,
Axford,
yeah.
come back. And so who knows? Maybe Votto comes out and hits a big home run to put him in the second round.
I
Throw,
would
throw
I would
that
I
out.
would I
Throw
would
that
sign
out.
up for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Before we let you go, I can't let you go without talking a little bit of college ball. Which Canadians, should fans be watching for this season at the college ranks? And is there any chance that we kind of get some Canadian action as the World Series rolls around?
I would say the one guy there's two to keep an eye on. The first one being Brendan Lawson, the former Ontario Blue
Yeah.
Jay at the University of Florida. Kevin O'Sullivan, the head coach there, moved him. He's a shortstop traditionally. Moved him to first base to start the year, and he does not look like a freshman. I think he's got 5 or 6 home runs now. He's hitting in the middle of the order. Florida, I think, is number 6 in the nation, number 7 in the nation. And Charles Davalin at the University of Arkansas. He's leading off for them a lot. They're like number 2 or number 3 in the nation. So those two. He's from, I believe, Montreal, off the top of my head. But those two are probably the two to watch. The come College World Series time. I really like Dallas Baptist.
Yeah.
They've been a good program. I was shocked when I looked it up. They've made a regional every year except for the COVID year
Okay,
since
wow.
2014, and they played in the Super Regional in 2021, lost to Virginia. They got Micah Bucknam, who transferred from LSU, who won the College World Series with the Tigers alongside Paul Skeens. He's their Friday night starter, and Tom Poole
Okay.
from Calgary. He's got some power and he's driving that offense. So I would say they're one of my dark horses. They're ranked, so I don't know how much of a dark horse they can really
Yeah.
be, but I would say Dallas Baptist is kind of my dark horse pick to make it to Omaha.
Similar vein, but last year you get Dante Nori and Nathan Flellen, a couple guys on day one. Anybody that you could see, obviously, many, many months from now. Any Canadians that you've got an eye on in terms of the MLB draft?
Oh, geez. I don't know. That's again another good question. It was interesting last year that Lawson for the kind of said he's not going to sign and went to Florida. I think he was the big guy last year that I was keeping an eye on. This year, goodness, I don't know. I'd have to look at our draft list to kind of narrow that down, but I'm sure there'll be some. I haven't dove in too much into the draft yet, but we'll be getting there.
Yeah, well, we look forward to it. Appreciate your time today, Matt. Is there anything that you can plug for us before you run here?
As far as predictions or.
Just like where can we find your work? What are you up to? What are you looking forward to covering this year?
Oh yeah, of course. If you want to read it, you can go to the Canadian Baseball Network. I got a new Substack covering Division I college baseball. It's called The Rundown, D1 Canadian Baseball. Canadian Baseball Network podcast on YouTube. We'll be doing certain live streams after Blue Jays games. Hopefully, gonna have some real awesome guests. Yeah, and obviously on Twitter at Betsy41, and I love all the interaction. So feel free to comment, agree, disagree. We can argue in a friendly manner, whatever you want to do. So yeah, I'm always down for that.
Awesome. Well, Matt, we really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and always great having you on. And we'll look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
There he goes. That is Matt Betts, the lead writer at Canadian Baseball Network and the host of the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. You can find him on Twitter at Betsy41. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View Pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter. And the pod is at BEV_pod. Thanks so much for listening.